Hello everybody, so in this video I'm going to show you how to get a really powerful cinematic snare, a bit like these League of Legends songs, you know, these really powerful epic snares. So what do you actually need to get such a powerful sound? First of all, you need the right samples, because if you only pick a very high piccolo snare, you know, you're not going to get this sort of punch. You need to have a snare sample that's low enough, sort of already pitched a bit low, so you can actually carry the weight, you know. So as you can see, this one here, okay, it's distorting here, sounds like a fart, but you can see it has a very low fundamental. It's around 200 or less. If you pick a very high snare, it's not going to work, so you need that big sample, right? Then I have another sample, which is mainly for the room. As you can see, this is less about the very low fundamental, but more about the decay, the room. So you could have 2, 3, 4 samples, or just one. If you have like a damaged sample that's already very processed, maybe it has all the characteristics you need already, and you can only fine-tune it with different plugins to get the right sound, right? So there is no right number of samples. Let's remove all the plugins and see what I did on each, so you can figure out what actually made this sound. So in this particular situation, this is my low punch sort of energy sample, which also has some highs, but you know, it carries that low fundamental. And this is my punch sample. Let me actually raise this a bit. Okay, on this low sample, what I wanted to enhance is the punch, so the actual kick of it. So I kind of almost consider like the snare is a small kick, just slightly higher, you know? It's like a low mid kick. So what do I do? Okay, so this EQ is just a little thing to clean up here to get a bit more kick, because I mean a bit more mid-range, because it was very scooped. Usually I don't like to boost this, but here it was very scooped. Then a bit less of this decay, because I wanted to use the other sample to actually take care of the decay. So this is just a little EQ, it's not doing much. But focus on this here. So this transient enhancer, it's detecting each hit, and whenever a hit happens, it's boosting the low end of only the transient part. So as you can see, I have my release here on 36 milliseconds. That means that the first 36 milliseconds of the sound are being boosted in the bass. So let me just show you. See that? So by doing this, I'm actually enhancing the punch of the snare and making sure that through the mix, I hear it like really kick, almost like a kick drum. Because by default, that sample was nice, but it was a little bit flat. It didn't have this sort of initial attack, right? And so in both the highs and the lows, it's very important to have some kind of initial attack, especially if you want to have this sort of kick in the gut feel for the snare. Then I have this saturation, which just gives a bit more tail. And it will actually sort of flatten the transient a bit. So it's sort of like we're boosting a transient and then we're sort of distorting it, so flattening it a bit. But it's okay because I boosted a lot of transient before. But this will also give us some distortion, some tail, some harmonics, so more character. It's subtle, but the tail is actually longer with this. Right? And there is a bit of a like on the attack. So it has a bit more energy, right? I think this EQ is just to make it darker during the quieter parts, so ignore this. Okay, we're gonna move on to the send here afterwards, but for now let's move on to the second sample. So as you can see, this one is not so much about the tail, but mainly like a low, powerful kind of sub kick. Well, not sub, but low mid kick for a snare, right? Now this is a room sample. You can hear it raw here with nothing. You can hear it's just like a room sample. Someone hit a snare in a room and it was recorded far away. Well, this is ideal. This is actually much better than just slapping one reverb on this and calling it a day, because the difference is that a room sample will actually contain the most natural possible reverb. The thing is, if you just put reverb on like a closer snare, it's not going to feel as dense, as rich, and as nice as an actual room sample. It's very common for like metal mixers or just any genre to layer room samples with a snare. So it can be like another snare, but at least it's recorded from far away. And then what you can do is just enhance it in various ways to really get this decay to be very present, and that's quite important, and I will explain in a minute. So first of all, as you can see, I just cleaned it up quite a bit. Let me actually go one by one. So here it's mostly about the room, so I just want to make sure it's clean. So I cleaned up a bunch of things. A bunch of muddy low mids, as you can see. I boosted a bunch of highs, so it's brighter, it has that bright tail. Then I have some, let's see what I have. Okay, some compression. Can you hear the difference? Like it goes from just like to like, it has a way more longer tail because of course the compressor is basically snapping here. It's compressing this a lot and then it's raising the tail. So it's sort of raising the decay. So the sound feels a lot more longer with this compressor. Because the compressor is also not acting instantly, it's snapping a little bit of the attack. So it's creating this attack and then it's releasing the tail. So you get like this pop-up at the beginning and then you get a long tail as it's pushing up all this decay, making the snare feel longer, right? Here there is a bit more processing, just it was a bit muddy, I guess, so I removed a bit of low mids. Then look at this. Okay, so I thought, okay, I want even more attack, so let's try to get more attack out of the out of this snare as well. So you know what? This one also has the little sub punch. Well, low mid punch. And then just some fine tuning. So what do I get here? I get one very compressed room sample and one nice beefy low sample. And together they sound pretty massive. Right, okay, that's what you want, but that's not all, right? Because we also have a reverb send. So here with this send, I actually have a plate as well. And what's interesting about it is that it actually compressed. So just a little EQ, nothing much. Here is my reverb, it's just a plate. It's actually, let's see how long it is, 2.2 milliseconds, 2.2 seconds. In this current state, it's not very loud, check it out. It's adding a bit of decay, but it's subtle, right? But let me max it so you can hear it. This is extra little decay, so it's to get even more of that room, even more of that splashiness, right? But anyway, I have it quite subtle in this particular case because I already have the room sample. So you don't have to use only one thing. You know, you can just get the punch, get the room sample, and also get some more reverb on top, you know? There is no rules, as long as it sounds good. But the thing is, see, I'm compressing this reverb a lot. So the goal is basically to get the end of the reverb, to sort of feel the end of the tail, to get an even more splashier, longer snare, right? So that's really the goal of this reverb. You know, not about the attack, but having a reverb that's really kind of adding a little bit of bloom at the very end of the tail, all right? So there is that. And also I'm thinking I'm automating this, yeah. So I'm only using this reverb for the choruses, just to give that extra little bit of splashiness. And so then, as you can see, these 3 layers, the snare kind of low, snare, room, and reverb are going into the snare all bus, which I just made red. So this is just a bus to kind of group all of them together. As you can see, I just balanced the levels a little bit differently as I felt, but so this is the low one. This is the room one, and the snare reverb is very subtle. But as you can see, the 3 layers land in the snare all bus. So what this is doing is basically compressing all the layers together with one little compressor. It's not doing much, but the goal is just to take all these layers and to redefine them even more and get a bit of snap out of them. As you can see, it's about 30 millisecond attack, about 100 millisecond release. And this 30 millisecond attack is just redefining a bit of a snap, kind of making all these layers feel as one. Let me actually... As you can see, if I compress too much, you can hear the snap it's creating, as opposed to no compression. Now, of course, I'm not trying to get that sound. It's not very nice. It would just make it feel like a click. It's not the goal. But you know, it brings a bit more power. You just do like 2 dB. It brings a bit more power to the snare, makes it feel more like it's one single sound due to this redefining of the attack. And also there is a bit more tail due to the decompression and having the release like this. It's of course flattening it a bit more, making it more upfront. So the reason you need all that tail and all that sort of excitement with the snare is because when you have a track that's very dense, like this sort of pop orchestral tracks, you know, very compressed, lots of layers, lots of synth, what's going to happen is that, well, the waveform kind of looks like this. Well, it's already sort of a sausage, right? We can draw it like this, but there is so many things at once. So if you want your drum to sort of poke through all that mess, you need to make sure that it has a long tail. So if I just had like a drum waveform like this, like a very snappy, let's say a rock snare, like indie rock snare, you know, like a, I don't know, something that's very sort of fast tempo, very short, well, it would just feel like a click, right? It wouldn't really poke through the mix. Now, if you have a snare that looks more like this, like, you know, like with a massive tail, of course, you're going to hear it splash for longer. You can consider that this part here gets buried. This gets buried, right, under the other instruments. And what you actually notice is only this part here. So of course, if it's longer, if it stays louder for longer due to compression and many things, well, your snare will sort of stay above the mix for longer, and that's how you retain lots of the power, right? Now, in solo, it's always going to feel more dramatic because you don't have the track masking the decay of the snare, right? But in context, all the instruments will mask that decay, so you're not actually going to hear the end much. It will be buried under the other instruments. So that's why it's important to compress, to kind of bring up all that tail and use snare room samples to bring up all that ambience and therefore feel like the snare is bigger. But if you only do that and you just compress without care and you only just try to get as much splash as possible and you crank the reverb, it's not going to do it as well. It's not going to work because, yeah, you might hear the tail, you might hear a very long snare, but you're not going to get that initial attack, that initial punch. And without the initial punch in the gut, you're not going to get any of this power. It will just sound like a boring long splash, you're right? So that's why what I want you to sort of do and consider is to get a snare sound that's like this. Like I want you to have like a very kind of, well, not a very, but a significantly snappy attack, and then have some kind of tail, right? And have it pretty long. It looks like a rocket, basically. So you have this initial attack part, right? Which is like the boom, like the punch in the gut. So it's going to be between 30 and 50 milliseconds. I mean, it could be up to 80 milliseconds. So I think about like 20 to 80 milliseconds, whatever you prefer. Have this initial punch. Make sure that you have it in the lows and you have it in the highs. If you only have it in the highs, it will feel like a click. If you only have it in the lows, it will feel like a dark punch, but it won't have any excitement. So have it like enough in the highs and the lows, and how much you want to get and at which frequency it will depend on the particular drum sample. You can do this with Pro MB as well. You don't need this plugin. You can use Pro MB to sort of expand certain parts of the spectrum. So the trick is to use expansion, right? So if I use Pro MB here, you can do things like this as well. Say, for example, you want to enhance the highs. You use expand mode, right? And then on each hit, it will sort of trigger an expansion and get more click. So of course you want to use a short attack, probably short release, and do this by ear. So the point is, listen to your sample, figure out what is missing. Like when you mix it at the right volume in the track, is it too clicky? Is it not enough clicky? Does it have enough bass? Try to EQ it first, EQ it as much as possible, as well as possible. And if, even with the EQ, you're not getting the necessary punch, you're not getting that sort of energy you're looking for, then it's probably a dynamic issue. It means you're probably lacking some punch in some areas or some click or both. Then it's up to you to hear these details and figure out, okay, I need more low-end punch, I need more high-end click, or I need less, who knows? And compress it, of course, to get that length of tail, and always listen in context to figure out, okay, do I need more tail? Because some samples are already very compressed, so you might not even need to compress a lot. Do I need more length? Do I need more attack? And that's really what it's all about, you know, balancing all this information, all this spectral information and this dynamic information in order to have it poke the exact way that you want. So guys, I hope that helped, and yeah, I hope you liked this video, and I will see you next time. Cheers!